Chapter 5 of No Clue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. No Clue by James Hay. Chapter 5. The Interview with Mrs. Brace. Gratified, and yet puzzled, by the results of his search in the upstairs rooms, Hastings was fully awake to the necessity of his interviewing Mrs. Brace as soon as possible. Lally, the chauffeur, drove him back to Washington early that Sunday morning. It was characteristic of the old man that as they went down the driveway he looked back at Sloanehurst and felt keenly the sufferings of the people under its roof. He was particularly drawn to Lucille Sloane, with whom he had had a second brief conference. While waiting for his coffee, nobody in the house had felt like breakfast. He had taken a chair at the southeast end of the front porch, and pulling a piece of soft wood and a knife from his gargantuan coat pockets, had fallen to whittling and thinking. Whittling, he often said, enabled him to think clearly. It was to him what tobacco was to other men. Thus absorbed, he suddenly heard Lucille's voice, low and tense. "We'll have to leave it as it was, Berne Webster interrupted her, a grain of bitterness in his words. "Rather an unusual request, don't you think?" "I wanted to tell you this after the talk in the library," she continued. "But They had approached Hastings from the south side of the house, and, hidden from him by the veranda railing, were upon him before he could make his presence known. Now, however, he did so, warning them by standing up with a clamorous scraping of his feet on the floor. Instinctively he had recoiled from overhearing their discussion of what was, he thought, a love affair topic. Lucille hurried to him, not that she had additional information to give him, but to renew her courage. Having called upon him for aid, she had in the usual feminine way decided to make her reliance upon him complete. And under the influence of his reassuring kindliness, her hesitance and misgivings disappeared. He had judged her feelings correctly during their conference in the parlor. At dinner she had seen in him merely a pleasant, quiet-spoken old man, a typical hick farmer, who wore baggy, absurdly large clothing for the sake of his circulation, he said, and whose appearance in no way corresponded to his reputation as a learned psychologist and investigator of crime. Now, however, she responded warmly to his charm, felt the sincerity of his sympathy. Seeing that she looked up to him, he enjoyed encouraging her, was bound more firmly to her interests. "I think your fears are unfounded," he told her. But he did not reveal his knowledge that she suspected her father of some connection with the murder. In fact, he could not decide what her suspicion was exactly, whether it was that he had been guilty of the crime, or that he had guilty knowledge of it. A little anxious, she had asked him to promise that he would be back by 10 o'clock for the inquest. He thought he could do that, although he had persuaded the coroner that his evidence would not be necessary. The judge and Webster had found the body. Their stories would establish the essential facts. "Why do you want me here, then?" he asked, not comprehending her uneasiness. "For one thing," she said, "I want you to talk to Father before the inquest. I wish you could now, but he isn't up." It was 8 o'clock when Miss Davis, telephone operator in the cheap apartment house on 14th Street known as the Wallman, took the old man's card and read the inscription over the wire. "Mr. Jefferson Hastings." After a brief pause, she told him, "She wants to know if you are a detective." "Tell her I am." "You may go up," the girl reported. "It's number 43. 4th floor. No elevator." After ascending the 3 flights of stairs, he sat down on the top step to get his breath. Mr. Hastings was stout, not to say sebaceous, and he proposed to begin the interview unhandicapped. Mrs. Brace answered his ring. There was nobody else in the apartment. The moment he looked into her restless, remarkably brilliant black eyes, he catalogued her as cold and repellent. One of the swift-eyed kind, he thought. Heart as hard as her head. No blood in her, but smart. Smart. He relied without question on his ability to size up people at first glance. It was a gift with him, like the intuition of women, and to it, he thought, he owed his best work as a detective. Mrs. Brace, without speaking, without acknowledging his quiet "Mrs. Brace, I believe?" led him into the living room after waiting for him to close the entrance door. This room was unusually large, out of proportion to the rest of the apartment, which included, in addition to the narrow entry, a bedroom, kitchen, and bath, all, so far as his observation went, sparsely and cheaply furnished. They sat down, and still she did not speak, but studied his face. He got the impression that she considered all men her enemies and sought some intimation of what his hostility would be like. "I'm sorry to trouble you at such a time," he began. "I shall be as brief as possible." Her black eyebrows moved upward in curious interrogation. They were almost Mephistophelian and unpleasantly noticeable, drawn thus nearer to the wide wave of her white hair. "You wanted to see me? About my daughter?" Her voice was harsh, metallic, free of emotion. There was nothing about her indicative of grief. She did not look as if she had been weeping. He could learn nothing from her manner; it was extremely matter-of-fact, and chilly. Only in her eyes he saw suspicion; perhaps, he reflected, suspicion was always in her eyes. Her composure amazed him. "Yes," he replied gently, "if I don't distress you." "What is it?" She suddenly lowered her eyebrows, drew them together until they were a straight line at the bottom of her forehead. Her cold self-possession made it easy, in fact necessary, for him to deal with facts directly. Apparently, she resented his intimated condolence. He could fling any statement, however sensational, against the wall of her indifference. She was, he decided, as free of feeling as she was inscrutable. She would be surprised by emotion into nothing. It was his brain against hers. "I want to say first," he continued, "that my only concern, outside of my natural and very real sympathy with such a loss as yours must be, is to find the man who killed her." She moved slowly to and fro on the armless, low-backed rocker, watching him intently. "Will you help me?" "If I can." "Thank you," he said, smiling encouragement from force of habit, not because he expected to arouse any spirit of cooperation in her. "I may ask you a few questions, then?" "Certainly." Her thin nostrils dilated once, quickly, and somehow their motion suggested the beginning of a ridiculing smile. He went seriously to work. "Have you any idea, Mrs. Brace, as to who killed your daughter, or could have wanted to kill her?" "Yes." "Who?" She got up, without the least change of expression, without a word, and as she crossed the room, paused at the little table against the farther wall to arrange more symmetrically a pile of finger-worn periodicals. She went through the communicating door into the bedroom, and from where he sat, he could see her go through another door, into the bathroom, he guessed. In a moment he heard a glass clink against a faucet. She had gone for a drink of water, to moisten her throat, like